You know that moment when your own daughter stands up at her wedding reception and decides to roast you in front of 200 guests? Yeah, that happened to me. But what happened next? Let's just say the room went from laughing at me to complete silence in less than a minute. Picture this: a stunning wedding venue with crystal chandeliers and everyone dressed to perfection. My daughter, Rachel, looked absolutely breathtaking in her white gown, and I was so proud watching her marry the love of her life. Everything was going perfectly, until she grabbed the microphone. I figured she was going to give a sweet thank you speech. Instead, she smiled at the crowd and said, "I want to talk about my mom for a minute. She's going through what I guess you'd call a late-life crisis." The crowd chuckled. At 60, she's decided she wants to build an empire. She even used air quotes. The laughter got louder. We keep telling her she should act her age, but she just won't listen. I sat there smiling, pretending everything was fine, but inside, I was dying. 200 people were laughing at what she called my midlife crisis. But here's the thing, none of them knew. Not even my daughter. While they were all mocking the crazy old lady trying to play entrepreneur, the most powerful person in that room was sitting quietly at table 6. Because what happened next? It involved Rachel's new husband's boss standing up, nearly choking on his champagne, staring at me in shock, and saying 5 words that changed everything. But to understand how my daughter's wedding turned into the most satisfying moment of vindication in my life, we have to go back 2 years. 2 years earlier, I was Diana Thompson, 60 years old, recently divorced, and honestly pretty lost. After 30 years as an office manager, I was laid off when the company restructured, which, let's be real, usually means let's replace the older folks with younger, cheaper ones. For the first time in decades, I was on my own. Rachel was 32, living with her fiancé, Jake. My ex-husband had remarried someone 15 years younger, because apparently that's what men do when they hit their midlife crisis. And there I was, sitting in my small apartment, wondering what the heck I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. But here's the thing about being 60 and suddenly unemployed. You've got 2 choices. You either accept that your best years are behind you, or you decide that all those years of experience actually mean something. I chose option 2. I started a consulting business helping small companies with their operations and efficiency. Nothing fancy, just using the skills I'd built over 3 decades of keeping offices running like clockwork. I called it DT Enterprises. Simple, professional, and it kept my name off the letterhead. But here's the problem. Nobody in my family took it seriously. Rachel would roll her eyes every time I mentioned a new client. "Mom, you're 60, not 23. Maybe it's time to act your age," she'd say. Jake was even worse, constantly trying to mansplain business basics to me like I was a kid playing dress-up. "Have you thought about getting a normal job instead of this entrepreneur phase?" My sister would chime in at family dinners. "Diana, you missed your chance. Just find something stable." Even my friends, well-meaning as they were, hurt me without realizing it. "It's cute that you're trying," they'd say. "But realistically, how much can you really accomplish starting over at your age?" The truth was, I was actually good at what I did. Really good. My clients were thriving, my contracts were growing, and I was making more money than I ever had before. But every time I shared a win, my family just patted me on the head like I was a toddler who'd managed to tie her shoes. Rachel was planning her wedding during this time, and she made it very clear she didn't want me talking about my little business around Jake's colleagues. "Please don't embarrass me by telling people you're an entrepreneur," she said. "Just say you're between jobs or something." And I agreed, because I loved my daughter and wanted her day to be perfect. But sitting there, listening to people joke about my so-called midlife crisis while I quietly paid for half the wedding, that's when it hit me. My family wasn't just unsupportive. They were ashamed of me for refusing to fade into middle-aged invisibility. And that hurt more than any layoff ever could. The wedding day came, and it was gorgeous. Rachel picked a beautiful venue with chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden. I'd paid for a big chunk of it, though she assumed the money came from my divorce settlement, not my successful business. That morning I dressed carefully. Elegant, not flashy. I didn't want to steal her spotlight. Rachel had reminded me again not to mention my consulting work to Jake's co-workers. "Just blend in, Mom," she said. Jake's boss, Mr. Anderson, will be there with his wife and a bunch of people from his tech company. They're serious business people, so please, no talk about your little projects. I bit my tongue and smiled. Little projects, right? The ceremony was perfect. Rachel looked like a princess. Jake seemed happy. I even cried happy tears. During cocktail hour, I mingled quietly, made small talk with family, stayed away from Jake's work crowd. But I couldn't help overhearing some of their conversations. Business deals, market strategies, acquisitions. I actually knew more about their industry than they realized, but I just smiled politely when introduced as the bride's mother. Then came dinner. Everything was going smoothly until Rachel's maid of honor took the mic. She started sweet, talked about their friendship and how beautiful the day was. But then she switched gears. "Now I have to talk about the bride's family," she said with a grin. "Especially Rachel's mom. She's been quite the character lately." The room chuckled. My stomach dropped. "Diana's going through what I guess you'd call a late-life crisis," she said. Laughter followed. "At 60, she's decided she wants to build an empire. We keep telling her she should act her age, but she won't listen. She's trying to compete with people half her age in business." The laughter grew louder. "But hey, at least she's keeping busy instead of just gardening like normal moms her age, right?" By now, everyone was laughing. 200 guests, all at my expense. I sat there frozen, cheeks burning, forcing a smile while my daughter's friend finished. "We love our delusional mom anyway." Applause. More laughter. But the worst part wasn't the maid of honor's speech. It was Rachel's face. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't stopping it. She was laughing, nodding along like it was all perfectly fine. Then Rachel stood up to give her own speech. I thought, okay, maybe she'll make it right. Maybe she'll say something kind. Instead, she doubled down. "Thanks for that, Amy. Yes, my mom has definitely been on an adventure lately," she said. "She keeps saying she's building a business empire, but we're just trying to help her accept that some dreams have expiration dates. When you're over 60, maybe it's time to be realistic about what you can actually do." The laughter rolled through the hall again. Jake's colleagues were nearly in tears. Mr. Anderson was shaking his head, smiling. Even the servers were trying not to laugh. I wanted to run, to disappear, but most of all, I wanted my daughter to stop humiliating me, to stop treating my work like a joke. And hey, Rachel added, we support Mom's hobby anyway, even if it means hearing about client meetings like she's some kind of CEO. The way she said CEO, dripping with mockery, broke something inside me. This wasn't just teasing anymore. This was cruel. And it was happening in front of everyone who mattered to her new husband's career. People who could have been my business contacts if they'd known the truth. When she finished her speech to thunderous applause, I felt hollow, defeated. I'd had enough humiliation for one night. I told myself I'd quietly slip out after dinner, say I wasn't feeling well. The last thing I wanted was to cause drama, even though my heart was completely shattered. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. People started coming up to my table, giving me that kind of fake, syrupy sympathy that makes your skin crawl. "Good for you for trying something new at your age," one of Jake's aunts said, patting my shoulder like I was a toddler who'd just learned to ride a bike. "It's never too late to chase dreams, even small ones," another guest added, with a smile that could have curdled milk. Jake's colleagues were even worse. Whenever someone introduced me as the bride's entrepreneurial mother, they'd give a polite nod, then immediately change the subject. You could practically see the thought bubble over their heads. "Oh, another middle-aged woman with a cute little side hustle." One guy even said, "That's wonderful." My mother-in-law started making crafts on Etsy. It keeps her busy. Busy. Like I was some charity case they should applaud for staying occupied between episodes of The Golden Girls. But the worst moment? That came when Jake, my son-in-law, pulled me aside during the cocktail hour. "Diana, thanks for being such a good sport about the speeches," he said, smiling that smug, polite smile. "I know Rachel was just having fun, but I didn't want you to feel bad about your consulting thing." "My consulting thing?" I repeated slowly. "Yeah," he said. "It's great that you're staying active, trying new things. I just hope you're not putting too much pressure on yourself to make it into something big. At your age, it's really more about staying engaged than building a career, right?" I just stared at him. This was the man my daughter married. The man who looked at me and saw... What exactly? A woman playing pretend? Jake, I said carefully, what exactly do you think I do? He shrugged. Some kind of small business consulting. Rachel said you help local shops with their paperwork or something, which is nice. Every little bit helps when you're starting over later in life. Local shops, paperwork, starting over. I smiled, nodded, and excused myself. Walked to the restroom. Sat in a stall and tried not to cry. Because it hit me. My own family thought I was some hobbyist just playing at business. They had no clue that in the past 18 months, I'd acquired 6 companies. 6. Including a major tech firm probably worth more than Jake would make in his entire career. When I came back out, I heard Rachel, my daughter, talking to one of her bridesmaids near the bar. Poor Mom, Rachel said. She's been so lost since the divorce. This business thing is just her way of feeling important again. We don't have the heart to tell her it's never going to be anything real. Her friend sighed. That's so sad. But at least she's keeping busy. Better than being one of those empty nest moms who calls every day. Rachel laughed. Exactly. Honestly, I'd rather have her playing entrepreneur than dating again. Can you imagine? They both laughed, and something inside me just cracked. This wasn't about being underestimated anymore. My own daughter, the person I raised, supported, loved through everything, genuinely believed I was pathetic. A sad, middle-aged woman clinging to some fantasy of relevance. The irony was brutal. While she was embarrassed of her entrepreneurial mother, I had quietly built something real. Something powerful. I got through dinner, smiling and nodding as more people offered helpful advice about keeping realistic expectations for women my age. I planned to slip out quietly after the cake cutting, fake a headache, and leave the newlyweds to their fairy tale. But then something happened I didn't see coming. During the after-dinner mingling, Mr. Anderson, Jake's boss, approached me. Mrs. Thompson, he said politely. I don't think we've met. I'm Robert Anderson, Jake's supervisor at Sterling Tech. Sterling Tech. My heart skipped. It's Miss Thompson, actually, I said, smiling slightly. And yes, I know who you are. He smiled back. Jake mentioned you're in business consulting. That's wonderful. What kind of work do you do? I looked at him, polite, professional, clueless, and I realized this was going to be interesting. Well, Mr. Anderson, I said, I work in acquisitions and operational consulting. I help companies optimize efficiency and growth potential. He nodded, still in small talk mode. That sounds fascinating. Mostly small local businesses, I imagine. Actually, I said, I focus on mid-sized companies in the tech sector. Firms ready to scale but needing strategic guidance and capital investment. His eyebrows lifted. Really? That's quite specialized. How long have you been doing that? About 2 years seriously, I said, though I've been building toward it for much longer. Impressive, he said. But I could tell he still thought I was talking about coffee shops and Etsy stores. Worked with any companies I might know? I paused. This was it. I could either keep pretending or tell the truth. After tonight, after the whispers, the laughter, my daughter's pity, I was done hiding. Actually, yes, I said. I recently completed an acquisition of Sterling Technologies. The look on his face was priceless. His polite smile froze midair. His eyes widened. Sterling Technologies? Yes, I said. The acquisition closed about 3 months ago. He blinked, processing. Wait, Sterling Technologies was acquired by DT Enterprises. You're not saying... I am, I said simply. I'm D. Thompson. The color drained from his face. You're the D. Thompson? That would be me. He nearly dropped his champagne glass. Oh my God, I had no idea. When Jake said his mother-in-law was in consulting, I never imagined... Miss Thompson, I am so sorry. It's fine, I said calmly. I prefer to keep a low profile. But he wasn't fine. His face was pale. His voice shook. Ma'am, this whole evening, the way people have been talking to you. He glanced around the room. This is mortifying. Mr. Anderson, I said softly. Please. I chose not to correct anyone. Tonight isn't about me. He shook his head. Half the people in this room work for companies you own. They've been talking about your little consulting hobby while cashing paychecks with your name on the top. I froze, then looked around, and realized he was right. 3 different companies I'd acquired in the past year were represented in that ballroom. All of them had smiled at me, patted my shoulder, and called me brave for staying busy. "Mr. Anderson," I said, "please don't make a scene. It's my daughter's wedding." He hesitated, jaw tight. "With all due respect, Miss Thompson, people need to know. Your daughter doesn't even know what you've accomplished?" "No," I admitted. "She doesn't." He looked stunned. "Your daughter thinks you help local shops with paperwork when you've built a $50 million portfolio in under 2 years?" I nodded quietly. Across the room, Jake was watching us, probably wondering why his boss looked like he'd seen a ghost while talking to his harmless, hobbyist mother-in-law. Mr. Anderson leaned closer. "Miss Thompson, what's happening here isn't just ironic. It's wrong. These people owe you respect, every single one of them." And standing there, under the soft light, surrounded by laughter that now sounded like static, I realized something. Yes, I'd built an empire. Yes, I'd been underestimated, but what really hurt was that the people I loved most never even tried to see me. Anderson leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice. "What's really disturbing," he said, "is that your daughter basically mocked you in her speech for having unrealistic business ambitions. But you haven't been unrealistic at all. You've been insanely successful. She just doesn't know it." I could feel my stomach twist. Jake was watching us now. He'd noticed Anderson's serious tone, and he started making his way over with that nervous, polite smile plastered on his face. "Everything okay here?" he asked lightly. "You two look like you're talking business or planning a coup." Anderson looked at me for permission, his eyebrows raised, silently asking, "Can I tell him?" I nodded. I was done pretending. "Jake," Anderson said carefully, "I was just learning more about your mother-in-law's consulting business." "Oh, that," Jake chuckled, waving a hand. "Yeah, Diana's been trying her hand at the business world. It's actually kind of cute how seriously she takes it." The look on Anderson's face was pure horror, like he'd just watched someone insult the CEO of their own company without realizing it. "Cute?" Anderson repeated slowly. Jake grinned, oblivious. "Well, you know how it is when people start over later in life. You've got to encourage them, even if their goals are a little optimistic." He patted my shoulder, as if that somehow softened the blow. "But we support Diana's little venture, don't we, Mom?" Anderson blinked. Once, twice. Then he said, in a tone that could have frozen fire, "Jake, I don't think you understand who you're talking about." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Anderson looked at me again. I gave him the tiniest nod. "Go ahead." He took a slow breath. "Your mother-in-law isn't playing at business, Jake. She is business. Diana Thompson is D. Thompson, the D. Thompson of DT Enterprises. She owns Sterling Technologies." Jake just stared at him, blank. Anderson kept going. "She owns the company we work for." Jake's mouth opened, but no words came out. He just blinked, trying to process what he'd heard. "That's," he stammered. "That's impossible. She drives an old Honda. She lives in a small apartment." Anderson didn't miss a beat. "She deliberately keeps a modest lifestyle. Serious investors do that. It keeps them focused." By now, people nearby had started to notice. Conversations died down. Heads turned. The air felt electric. Anderson realized the cat was officially out of the bag. And honestly, after the night I'd had, I wasn't exactly eager to stop him. "You know what?" he said, his voice suddenly louder. "I think everyone should hear this." Before I could react, he was walking toward the microphone. "Excuse me, everyone," Anderson said, tapping the mic. His voice boomed across the reception hall. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just learned something extraordinary." The band stopped playing. Every conversation went silent. 200 heads turned our way. I wanted to sink into the floor. Anderson cleared his throat. "I owe an apology to someone here tonight. Miss Diana Thompson." Rachel's face twisted in confusion. Her new husband's boss was talking about me at her wedding? "You see," Anderson continued, "many of us have been treating Miss Thompson like she's dabbling in business as a hobby. We've patronized her, underestimated her, even made jokes. And we were dead wrong. A hush fell over the room. I could feel all those eyes on me. Curious, confused, stunned. What we didn't realize, Anderson went on, his voice steady and strong, is that Diana Thompson is actually Dee Thompson, founder and CEO of DT Enterprises, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in our industry. Gasps, actual gasps. Someone dropped a fork. Rachel made a little choking sound. In the past 18 months alone, Anderson said, Ms. Thompson has acquired 6 major companies, including Sterling Technologies, where I serve as Chief Operating Officer. She's built a business portfolio worth over $50 million. The silence was deafening. Then chaos. What? Rachel's voice cut through the room like glass. People started whispering all at once. The Hendersons, who'd spent half the night patronizing me, were whispering frantically to each other. The Patels looked like they'd seen a ghost. Jake was still standing there, completely pale, his mouth hanging open like a cartoon character. And one more thing, Anderson added, clearly on a roll now. Roughly half the people in this room actually work for companies Miss Thompson owns. So when you've been joking about her so-called unrealistic dreams, you've basically been mocking your own boss. That's when the real panic hit. You could see people mentally replaying everything they'd said to me that evening. Every fake smile. Every good for you, dear. Every condescending pat on the shoulder. The guy who'd compared me to his crafting aunt looked ready to vomit. Rachel just stood there, staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Mom, she whispered, is this true? Before I could answer, Anderson handed me the microphone. I think Miss Thompson should be the one to respond. And just like that, the entire room went still again. 200 people, waiting. I took the mic. My voice trembled just a little. Well, yes, it's true. I am Dee Thompson of DT Enterprises. The noise erupted again. Gasps, whispers, a few stunned expletives. But I kept speaking. I know this is a surprise, especially for my family. I've kept a low profile on purpose. I've always believed that results speak louder than recognition. I looked at Rachel, her face pale, her eyes wide. Honey, I didn't tell you because you specifically asked me not to talk about my business tonight. You were embarrassed by what you thought was my little consulting hobby, so I stayed quiet. But Mom, she said, her voice shaking, you said you were doing small business consulting. I smiled faintly. I never said small. I said business consulting. You just assumed that because I hesitated, then finished softly. Because you thought I was too old to accomplish anything big. You could have heard a pin drop. When you gave your speech earlier, I continued, and talked about my late life crisis. You were talking about a business that employs over 400 people. When you said I should have realistic expectations, you were referring to achievements that already exist. Jake finally found his voice. Diana, I had no idea. I feel like such an idiot. Jake, I said gently, you assumed a woman my age couldn't possibly know more about business than you. That's something worth reflecting on. But my eyes stayed on Rachel. My daughter looked crushed, not proud, not happy, just humiliated that she'd been so wrong, in front of everyone. Mom, she said quietly, why didn't you tell me? Because every time I tried, you rolled your eyes. You said I was having a midlife crisis. You told me some dreams have expiration dates. You asked me not to embarrass you in front of Jake's colleagues. I looked around the room, at all the people who'd laughed and smiled and underestimated me. And it hit me how poetic this moment was. Most of them worked for me. They just didn't know it. Anderson stepped forward again. If I may, he said. Miss Thompson has been extraordinarily gracious tonight. She endured public mockery rather than upstage her daughter's wedding. That takes strength and love. Rachel's maid of honor, the one who'd made the joke in her speech, looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. I took a slow breath and smiled at the crowd. Well, I said, I hope you'll all forgive the dramatic reveal. This wasn't how I planned the evening to go. But sometimes, the truth just shows up whether you want it to or not. I looked at Rachel, my voice softening. Now, Let's get back to celebrating this beautiful couple." I handed the microphone back to Anderson and sat down. The music eventually started again. People began to murmur, laugh nervously, raise glasses, but the energy in that room had shifted forever.